Hi, and welcome to the 10 square metre workshop. This Napoleonic cannon has been quite a long build, and it's now coming to an end with this episode. You're probably glad of that? I know I am. Still plenty to do, so let's get on with it. The top trunnion straps are folded in a jig in the same way as the bottoms. The ends are then folded back, and the slot cut to fit over the eye bolt. Once this is a smooth fit, the slot can be put in the back to take the hook. In use, the top trunnion slots in at the back, then slides over the front eye bolt. A peg will be going in there to hold it in place. At the rear of the frame are these rather complicated handles, meant for manoeuvring. They're quite a three-dimensional item because they have straps over the frame as well as the handle. I'm going to fabricate this with the whole lot just being held in by the rivets. I'm starting with this 1.5mm wire and hammering the ends to make a flat surface. The assembly consists of the handle itself plus two straps. The two straps go over the side frame and carefully fitted, a rivet at a time. I think the result is quite satisfactory and a lot simpler than some of the schemes I came up with. The square frame for the traversing rods was made by folding a piece of wire around a square section tube. The join will be hidden by one of the hinges, and they are made from some 1/4 mile steel bar, turned in the lathe, then flats milled on them before drilling out 1.4mm. And here it is, assembled and ready to attach. For each of the many components and add-ons, one has to decide whether to make them from solid or to fabricate them. In this case, the plate for the brake chain I'm fabricating from two parts brazed together, taking care that none of the braze will show in the final item. Brazed, cleaned up and blued, it looks like this. Lots more to do. It's worth using a variety of techniques for all these accessories, both from variety and learning. This spike was turned, bent to shape in the vise, and then turning a mounting spigot, being careful of that flying hook. The result can be parted off. This then mates to a small piece of plate, made from a piece of scrap. Slightly riveted to hold it in place, it was then brazed. A matter of a few seconds, and it gets blued as part of the process. With the excess braze filed off, the sprue cut off and the cut edges blued, that's another part made. The rear bracket is somewhat more complicated. Here's a sketch with some dimensions. I'm going to try and machine this from the solid by milling. And this is the piece of 60mm square steel bar that I'm going to be using. I started by machining the end face. This not only needs machining, but this gives me a reference for when I flip the block over. I then machined the top surface to give an overall thickness of 5mm for this tongue. The thickness of the bracket itself is 2mm, which means I need to remove 1.5mm from each side. This is the first side, and here it is, replicated on the other side. Flip through 90 degrees. I'm now going to do a small bit of machining on the top, and that's another step done. Now flipped vertically to form the eye bolt and drill the peg hole. With the eye bolt lug machined and with the hole for the retaining peg centre drill, with the top lug formed, I drilled through 1.5mm for the retaining pin. Time to form the hook now. And here's the main slot made using a 4mm end mill. I next roughed out the inner slot using the same 4mm end mill before changing to a 2mm and pecking out the corners of the radius. There it is, the majority machined out. Just need to clean it up now and separate it from the stub. A couple of more milling passes and the top foot is free. The bottom one will have a spike formed on it. Free from the stub and inverted, the spike can be formed by milling in 4 directions. With the spike filed round, because let's not get silly with this machining, the part is finished, ready to mount. And finally, here it is, blued with a keeper pin and chain. But is it worth all the effort to machine such a small part? Well, if you enjoy the process, then yes, it is. And I'm going to get a bit lyrical now. You'll recall that Michelangelo said he could see the statue of David inside the marble, and all he had to do was remove the marble that wasn't David. Well, this is a similar sort of process, only done mathematically rather than artistically. You dial in the numbers and the part appears. It's really quite magical. And with that made, all the furniture could be added to the side frames. Using the same techniques as used previously, the metal strips were fitted to the crosspiece. Because they have a key slot, the rear trunnion eyelets need a bulge round the middle, as you can see. Which means after it's been milled flat on both sides and the 6mm hole put through the middle, it has a little ear on each side. Only one is needed so the other one can be filed off. And at the same time the shape can be filed more round. The item now looks like this, with a small keyway to the right. It can now be parted off to the same height as the back eyelet, with a boss to increase the threading depth. Drilled and tapped 2mm and a piece of 2mm studding added. That's another part finished. After making another one of these, I have all the parts to complete the sub-assembly. Or at least I have when I've made the 5 nuts and 4 washers also required. Or rather, it's ready when all the bits have been blued. And here it is. And with that completed, I could finally put the frame together. Looking good. Next the wheels, and finally the barrel. Lots more accessories to make, but I'm substantially there. The traversing rods start as oak blanks, which are turned in a wood lathe, parted off, stained, and the ends fitted. One end is just a ferrule, the other has to be formed. The stacking handles start out as a piece of half-mil steel, shaped like this. After drilling for the rivet holes, I made a small steel former for bending this. Firstly, the hoop on the end, before combining it with an outside former to shape the rest. The result, glued and attached to the end of the traversing rod. I soon found bending them in the other order is better. This is my nailing jig for putting the rivets in. Well supported. The traversing bars are fitted with small studs in the side. These fit into the keyhole at the side of the first ring, and when they're through, it's rotated and now it's locked in place. And the 4 rods fit down the left hand side with a securing pin at the rear. I turned the grooves for the spiral extractor in the lathe to start on an 8mm rod, and I'm going to use 1mm wire, and then put a slot in the top using a hacksaw and needle file to align with one of the grooves. The top ears then have to be relieved, otherwise there'd be no way of getting it off. With the 1mm wire in the groove, I can now start bending it round the spiral. The wire is then carefully bent round the spiral. The result may need some adjustment, but first I'll brace it to the mount. Brace to a small brass sleeve and antiqued, it can be fitted on the end of the shaft. The ramrod brush was a similar project. Turned in one piece, I used a largish dental brush for the brush on one end and light cotton on the other end to simulate the canvas backing. I made the box and lid from 1.5mm thick oak. The corner bands were made from shim steel, which was then blued as usual. There's a lot of metal cladding on this box. The top was covered in brass, for which I'm using some brass shim. I'm using a small vise with very square jaws to do the folding. After removing the corners, the fold lines were scored in. The vise cannot fully form the edges, but it can make a start, which can be completed using parallel jawed pliers. Once in place, a bit of burnishing ensures a pretty tight fit. It stays on just by its own bending, but I'll put a bit of super glue on it. The carrying handles involve more shaping of small pieces of wood. There follows much cutting, filing and bending of thin strips of 0.5mm steel strip. Making it look like there's rivets on the straps is a two-step process. First of all, hit from the rear with a centre punch into wood, then a blow to the front using this punch I made with a hollow in the middle. The combination leaves a dome shape, simulating a rivet. The handles are mounted temporarily using 1.5mm bolts. This seemed like a good time to add some patina to the lid for that campaign look. On the bottom of the box, the straps cross each other, and any decent blacksmith would fold the metal round, so I have to do the same. To do that, I've milled out a slot and a high point in these two pieces of steel. Squeezed together, this should form the strap into a U-shape. By lining up and squeezing, seems to work on this trial piece. Just have to do it live now and get them in the right place. Well, I think that's worked out pretty well. Just another one to make, rivets to add, and bluing of course. After fitting the hinges on the lid, there's lots more small parts to make, such as filing 1.6mm bolts with a square head, and making square shaped steel nuts to fit, because this is the way the side handles were held on, bolts through the side of the box. The catch is a rotating part that fits inside a sleeve. It has a pierced lug on it, which rotates and prevents the lid opening. Quite fine turning work this. With the wooden dividers in place, that's another part finished. The ammunition box fits between the sides of the frame. That's why they're narrowed at that point. And there we have it, the cannon complete, or as complete as it's going to be for the moment. It's been quite a long build, but it's also been enjoyable. Hope you enjoyed it too. It is of course not fully finished yet. There's still a few accessories, and I may or may not make the limber for it. That's all I'm going to do at the moment. Hope you enjoyed it. Been a long build. Bye for now.